This is CUNY TV, the City University of New York.
Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio, and this is Decision 2012 on City Talk. The headlines, the covers, Newsweek, Muslim rage, Time, the agents of outrage, The Economist, murder in Libya. The stories, mass demonstrations and embassy attacks throughout the Middle East. Islamists consolidating power in Egypt. Wither the Arab Spring. Joining us to discuss the Middle East and U.S. policy as part of CUNY TV's Decision 2012 program is Michael Wahid Hanna. Michael is a fellow at the Century Foundation, focusing on the Middle East and U.S. foreign policy in the region, and also on issues of international security and human rights. Prior to joining the Century Foundation, Michael was a senior fellow at the International Human Rights Law Institute, where he conducted research on post-conflict justice, victims' rights under international law, and the Iraqi High Criminal Court. Welcome back, Michael.
Thanks for having me again.
A lot's happened here, in both here, the United States, and the Middle East since you were here last November. What is going on here in the Middle East?
Well, a lot is going on, obviously. It is a region in transition. Because these regime changes happen from the bottom up, essentially through popular uprisings, we're in a process where people are recreating institutions, trying to establish a political culture, a viable political culture, and that's going to take time. And so I think some of these incendiary magazine covers, I think I'll take the Economist cover when we're talking about trying to sort of place this moment and contextualize it. Because this latest outburst was small-time protests. These weren't big protests. These were, by the scale of protests we've seen, something much smaller, not on the grand scale of popular mobilization that toppled regimes.
This isn't the Arab street, if you will, but this seems to be less spontaneous and more the product of conscious actions by a minority in the region.
Well, I think it's both. I mean, I think there is some spontaneity involved. Mm-hmm. There is genuine outrage. I think this video was perhaps the spark. It taps into a lot of long-standing grievances with the United States. It's not just about the video. That being said, there was also some planning on the part of some groups. But if we look at the Cairo protests that breached the embassy walls, a very dangerous act. We're talking about 2,000 people. This isn't the 500,000 people that filled Tahrir Square in January and February of 2011. It's a much different moment than what we saw in the recent past.
But it has profound consequences. I mean, it's the death of a United States ambassador, 3 other officials. The French had to close 22 embassies in the region over cartoons. Why this violent reaction to quote-unquote blasphemy? Why can't you make fun of the prophet? What is it? I mean, Joe Scarborough got in trouble and deservedly for talking about it's something fundamental to the culture. It's something fundamental to the religion. What is it?
Well, I don't think it's any of those things, but I do think there is not a tradition of robust free speech. And of course, we should recognize first and foremost, and thankfully, that we have a very robust, mature tradition and history of protection of free speech. And our protections are not comparable even to the European setting, where we have numerous states that have hate speech restrictions. I think that's a very silly route to go. I am something of an absolutist when it comes to speech, but ours is on one side of the spectrum. Now, the tradition in the Arab world and in other parts of South Asia, it looks quite different. And I think there isn't that same type of tradition in terms of robust free speech. Blasphemy is a big deal. It's a big deal for Muslims and Christians, which isn't to say that this sort of reaction is understandable or justifiable, but these societies come at issues of speech from a very different place.
Yeah, and the video was both, if you will, a match and an accelerant. Has it burned itself out? at least in the short run?
I think so. I think so, and I think if we look at the reactions in each place are quite different. I mean, Libya is in a different space and place with respect to how it views the rest of the world than a place like Egypt. If we look at Libya, Libya's uprising succeeded because it opened itself up to the rest of the world and sought outside assistance. That has ramifications in terms of their receptivity to not only the United States, but the international community writ large. And so that society has a fundamentally different approach to the U.S., and that, I think, stands in very stark contrast to a place like Egypt, which represents a much more complicated and complex and long-standing bilateral relationship that is not problem-free. I mean, part of the Egyptian uprising invigorated populist sentiment, and although U.S. flags weren't being burned in the uprising, we underwrote the sort of security architecture of the region, and we were part of the support of the Mubarak regime. And so, you have these differing reactions in a place like Libya and Egypt. I mean, very different. We see a sort of common reaction, but it's always good to deal with these places with a bit of nuance because things are happening differently in each place.
And as you've warned, in a sense, it's early. I mean, we're in the midst of the activity. There's sort of a fog of war about of all this and where it all goes. Absolutely.
I mean, I think we are in a moment of probably generational change. I mean, these societies have immense challenges, and challenges that are going to play out not in weeks and months, but in years and decades, frankly.
When you talk about generational change, are you talking specifically about age cohorts? Are you talking about ideological generational change, or both?
Well, just in terms of how long it's going to take for this moment of transformation to play itself out. And when I say that, I don't mean that it's necessarily headed to a good place. I mean, results aren't foreordained. I think this is a moment of opportunity. It was an opening, a political opening that had to happen. That being said, this isn't a controlled setting. And so whether they can get their economic house in order, whether they can deal with education, whether they can reform their police, there's a whole host of issues of governance and establishing a viable and sustainable and inclusive political culture. Those are big tasks that aren't going to be resolved in a matter of months.
Well, then what are the drivers of change, whether it's regional, if one can talk about change in the region or regions, plural, or in individual countries? What's driving it on a macro level?
Well, I mean, I think we saw the antecedents to a lot of these uprisings, I think, are in a sense shared. This is a regional moment. It's hard to understand what is happening as a country-specific progression. So this is a shared moment. There is a shared media space. It's difficult to imagine the Egyptian uprising without the Tunisian uprising, and similarly the Libyan uprising. So we have economic disenfranchisement, we have political repression, we have a lack of representational politics. We have all of these shared attributes, but of course, again, how they're going to play out in each place is going to look quite different. In a place like Egypt, with long-standing institutions as compared to a place like Libya, a much smaller country, 6 million as compared to 83 million, that had no political culture and no institutional infrastructure. Obviously, the progression and transition is going to look quite different.
With the Arab Spring, I mean, there were great expectations and hope, and certainly the outcomes are not as felicitous as these hopes and expectations. What season are we in here?
I think we should discard the seasonal comparisons.
Good.
But, I don't know. I mean, again, I think this is a generation. Whether you can reorganize an economy to create sustained growth and more equitable distribution, whether you can actually revitalize pedagogical culture to revamp your educational infrastructure these aren't changing. We know how difficult these changes are.
These are Herculean.
Absolutely. These are big tasks for us here in this country. So these are big changes that are going to have to be dealt with properly And the failure to do so, I think, has some very serious negative ramifications. You could imagine retooled authoritarianism. I mean, you know, if economics go bad, that's not a firm foundation upon which to build open, pluralistic politics.
And also, not only could it potentially, one of the roads taken or not taken could lead to authoritarianism again. You could have total societal breakdown and civil war. I mean, we'll talk about Syria as a potential. We already saw it in Iraq. The question is Syria Iraq? The bigger questions. Political Islam. What kind of political Islam is emerging, and can we characterize it in a unitary way? What's happening?
It's not a monolith. I mean, this is a space, a political space now that is very varied. You have the most rigid political actors, Salafis, who had traditionally rejected participation in democratic politics as un-Islamic. This was traditionally the main historical divide between a group like the Muslim Brotherhood and the quietist political actors, the Salafis, who rejected political participation, who saw their goal in terms of a sort of missionary societal process.
And in a sense, they want to go back to, 14th centuries to, the time of the Prophet. So we're talking about really pre-modern, and in terms of European history, almost pre-Dark Ages.
So clearly they have them, they are the most rigid along the spectrum.
Right.
You have a group like the Muslim Brotherhood, which is the dominant political force in Egypt, that is more reformist-minded, a group we can more readily recognize. You have an Islamist group like the Nahda Party in Tunisia that looks, I think, slightly different even than the Egyptian variant of Islamism. So it's not a monolithic space, and I think these groups were able to maintain coherence under consistent repression. Their ability to act as unified actors in this more chaotic space, I think, is a big question. So we might see fragmentation in coming years because these baskets are quite broad. So we might see fissures and divisions within the Muslim Brotherhood emerge. And I think that's something.
Well, we've already seen, I mean, the classic conflicts between Sunni and Shia and the various sects within those fighting between and among themselves seems to be one of the ubiquitous features of the region. I mean, how does one get beyond the sectarian conflict? You really haven't done it in Iraq. What is the mechanism by which this begins to glue or to congeal?
Well, obviously, sectarianism is a problem that has gotten new life because primarily of the Syrian civil war. Obviously, sectarianism takes on different hues depending on the society. In Egypt, it is a Christian-Muslim dynamic with a Christian Coptic minority that makes up something like 10 to 12% of the population. There are no Shia. But in a place like Syria, you have a very heterogeneous society, and sectarianism now is having something of a boom in the region. And I think that's a very difficult and problematic dynamic to get a hold of.
Why the boom? What is it about go ahead.
A lot of it is being driven by Syria. This is becoming a proxy conflict with outside actors backing various sides of the conflict. And those lines are drawn pretty neatly along sectarian lines. So you have Iran and Hezbollah. These are Shia powers lining up behind the regime of Bashar al-Assad, which is an Alawite regime. This is an offshoot of Shiism, not a traditional, not the traditional Shiite religion. But essentially, you have these forces.
And you have a Sunni majority.
Absolutely. A Sunni majority and outside backers who are Sunni powers, Saudis, the Qataris. And this is driving a very stark and polarized sectarian dynamic.
Syria seems to be looking like Iraq in terms of its sectarian breakdown. I mean, looking ahead, is it likely that you'll have the sectarian violence that you had in Iraq?
We've got it.
You've got it.
It is a civil war. It is in many ways a sectarian civil war. The Alawite minority probably represents about 10% of the Syrian population. They have run the country. They dominate the security sector. And so in some ways, many Alawites see this in existential terms. And so it is forced a sort of communitarian consolidation, if you will. And it's quite problematic.
So Assad goes one way or another. He's gone. What are the prospects in a post-Assad Syria?
It's a big question. You know, and first off, I don't know when that post-Assad Syria is going to happen. I mean, I don't think it's necessarily a matter of weeks or months. This is a stalemated civil war in many ways. So this could last a year or more. That being said, the fall of Assad doesn't necessarily mean the end of fighting. There are essentially militia groups that are outside the formal structures of the state. That could be
like Iraq.
Exactly. This could be an insurgency. So I think we could see prolonged fighting that lasts for years in Syria.
Chance of military intervention and the U.S. response. It's been heavily criticized, certainly within this presidential campaign. But what has been the U.S. response, and what could it be?
Well, I mean, I think it's very hard at times for Americans to assimilate the fact that some things are not solvable by realistic means and methods. And I think Syria is something that presents no good answers. There aren't easy solutions. I don't think there's going to be a military intervention. It just, it's very unclear to me that would actually ameliorate the situation to begin with. And I think
it'd be much more difficult to do militarily anyway.
Absolutely. I mean, are we prepared to occupy Syria? I mean, that's, you know, if you play this out, it's very unlikely that air power alone could decide this. It would be undertaken without Chapter 7 authorization. The Russians and the Chinese are not going to allow this to get through the Security Council. You know, and after the experience of Iraq, those things suggest, I think, a course of caution. And I think you'll note that a lot of the critique of the current administration's policy on Syria is rhetorical in many ways. And when you actually look at, say, the Romney critique of the Obama policy, it doesn't look very different because I think trying to deal with this militarily is not something, one, that the American public is particularly behind, and I think is not a particularly wise course of action. So I don't think we are going to see military intervention anytime soon.
Mitt Romney becomes president-elect on November 7th, and he gives you a call, given the fact that you're a Middle East and an Egypt expert. What do you tell him? What regionally and in Syria or Egypt, for example, which we'll go to next?
Well, you know, I think reality is going to have its own effect. And I don't think, even if we saw a Romney administration, that we would see particularly huge shifts in policy. I think what is happening is being driven primarily by people on the ground. We're obviously a big player in the region still, but we aren't going to be able to be in a position to dictate outcomes or to drive events. So I think realism is going to prevail in many ways. And if I were to have one piece of advice, it would be not to get bogged down too much in the minutia of any of these societies. And that suggests a somewhat reactive approach, but I think what we have to do now is take something of a step back and see what is emerging without going too far in any extreme or overreacting to any one particular set of events.
Okay, let's go to Egypt. You and a number of pieces suggest that the transition, and to use your phrase, the transition in Egypt was ill-fated, and that Morsi's got near total political power now that he sacked the generals and really consolidated executive power. What's going on?
Well, it's been a mismanaged transition from the start. I mean, I think a lot of people had high expectations and hopes, probably unrealistic expectations for Egypt. But this has been a badly managed transition, ad hoc, opaque as to why and how things are happening. The primary fault for this, I think, lies with the military that tried to drive the transition process. and I think secondarily for the Muslim Brotherhood. I mean, most of this transition has been a negotiated process between these two main powers in the country, and they remain the two main powers in the country. Where it goes from here, I think isn't clear. I mean, I think a lot of it depends on, one, there will be upcoming elections, parliamentary elections,
which was dissolved.
Exactly. And so there's been chaos. You know, Egypt has been a chaotic transition. Anything that sort of could go wrong in many ways has.
And still could.
And still could. I mean, that being said, we haven't seen civil strife. Protests has remained mostly peaceful. I mean, what the country has been through, in many ways, where we are now is not the worst of possible outcomes. I think we still have an unbalanced political process. I think in terms of going forward, it is imperative that the non-Islamist political sphere unites, acts in coordinated fashion. There has to be an electoral counterweight to the Muslim Brotherhood.
Who are these folks? And they certainly haven't been an electoral counterweight thus far. What leads you to believe that the prospects are any finer now?
Well, politics in Egypt is pretty fluid, and in terms of allegiance, it has shifted quite a bit. If we look at the first round of the presidential elections, the Muslim Brotherhood candidate, Mohammed Morsi, who eventually became president, he got about a quarter of the vote. Non-Islamists competed. They finished second, third, and fifth. And arguably the fourth place finisher is something of a reformist Islamist. So there is some fluidity in Egyptian politics. I think there are some huge advantages, particularly in terms of organization and logistics, that are going to take years for the non-Islamist opposition to overcome.
What is dividing them? What are the lines of cleavage? I mean, multiple lines of cleavage.
Sure. A lot of it is some of it is organizational. It's very difficult to found political parties, to canvass, to be able to function on a national basis, to field parliamentary candidates in all of the electorates of Egypt. That's something that's quite hard, and if you can imagine doing that in a period of 4 to 5 months, it's quite difficult. That being said, and recognizing the real challenge there, there's been a lot of petty infighting, there have been personality conflicts, there's been a lack of urgency, I think, and one would hope that the previous political history that we've seen in this 18 months of transition will have created a bit of realism on the part of some of these actors, because there's a really serious need for some coordination to create a legitimate counterweight.
Yeah, because there is no counterweight. In terms of democratic principles, the current regime is certainly not that, and doesn't particularly appear headed either in a substantive sense or in a process sense in that direction.
There are things to worry about. They are now drafting a constitution. There's a constituent assembly. Some of the provisions in the current draft are problematic. I think.
Problematic in what sense?
In terms of ensuring a pluralistic political order that ensures equal rights for all citizens. You know, that's not a given in this transition, frankly.
And what is it?
You know, issues like how you deal with the rights of Christians, whether they can be full citizens in a place like Egypt, women's rights. These are live questions, and how they get resolved now, you know, that's going to have very serious implications going forward.
Okay, let's have one more stop in this sort of geographical tour. The Israel-Palestine conflict. In a sense, we're nowhere. We're stalled. You've got the situation where the Israeli prime minister is attempting to dictate American policy directly and undermining the president. Am I reading that right?
I think you are reading that right. I think the United States has now rebuffed the attempt to, you know, to sort of micromanage our policy with respect to Iran. There was a call for us to clearly delineate red lines, which means to sort of place policy in a straitjacket.
Right.
That's very unwise. I think this administration has wisely pushed back, made it clear that we are going to be the authors of our Iran policy, that we do want to preserve a space of flexibility with respect to how this policy evolves, and we've shunned the idea of explicating very clear red lines. And I think that's a very positive step that has been taken recently.
What is Egypt's strategic or geopolitical significance for the United States?
Well, it's been a sort of linchpin of regional security policy for the United States, particularly since Sadat made a very clear shift away from the Soviet sphere in following the 73 war, and particularly after signing the Camp David Accords. Obviously, there is Camp David, the Accords itself, is sort of a centerpiece of regional policy. It ensures peace between Egypt and Israel. And in that respect, I think you might see calls for renegotiating aspects of the treaty, but I don't think Camp David itself, the broad understandings or the framework, is under any threat. And I think we've seen a whole slew of Egyptian political actors make that clear. And I think that's a very important piece to take away from this.
Okay, last question. Is there an Obama doctrine in the Middle East? And what do you expect in 4 years? We talked a little bit about what Romney might do. I mean, certainly he's rejected the two-state solution and really cast aspersions on the Palestinians' ability to govern. What about Obama? He wins a second term. Any change?
I don't know that there will be massive change. I think there will be a small window of opportunity with the Iranians if Obama wins this election. I think we'll have something like 6 to 9 months before the Iranian elections within which you could see positive progress, short of a sort of grand bargain of the sort that I think is very unlikely. I think what is happening now is reorientation of our policy. We are trying to get used to the notion that we have a fractious political space. We don't have client states in some places. Egypt is not going to be an easy partner to get along with. We have to deal with a wide array of political actors that are trying to stake out their own domestic political position and interests. So it's a much more difficult process, one that's much more high maintenance.
When should you come back? When should we have enough perspective to look back on this? Well, don't tell me decades.
Well, I mean, I think every 6 months is a good plan. I think there's a lot happening in the region, and I think it has shown us over the previous 2 years that unexpected things are going to happen.
Expect the unexpected.
Yeah, absolutely.
The unknown unknowns are always there.
Right.
My thanks to Michael Wahid Hanna for joining us today. Tune in next week to Decision 2012 on City Talk with David Birdsell, Dean of the School of Public Affairs at Baruch, one of the nation's foremost experts on presidential debates. Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio. Let us know what you think about this show. You can reach us at CUNY.TV. When you get there, click on the bar that says Contact Us and send your email. Whatever it is. Thanks, no thanks, obnoxious, do it. Send it.